In modern 21st century cinema, the camera seems to move forever, and I must say I'm intrigued by the Zemeckis film here. I've seen a few minutes of it, not enough to really judge, but the idea of a film where the camera is static strikes me as something of a relief after watching Marvel films, which sometimes, frankly, make me want to vomit. Not the content or the performance or the special effects, but simply the sweeping camera moves again and again and again. And sometimes I have to close my eyes. The quick edits, the visuals that are supposed to transport the viewer, they transport me into the lavatory. And what happens when directors purposefully constrain movement, limit edits, embrace restraint? The results can be daring, hypnotic, divisive, and invariably they challenge the viewer's perception of film as a medium. So I'm interested in the idea of the camera as something that is still. In my own work, I'm interested in some dolly shots, actually, because the dolly shot is something which is very difficult to do in animation, and I'm always tempted to try and embrace that. And how do you move the camera back incrementally as the scene is developing? And I'm constantly experimenting with that because it's not done. And I think we should challenge the things that are not done. And Zemekis Here, along with classics like Alexander Sukharov's Russian Ark and Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, these are, and the films of Peter Greenaway, certainly the early films like The Draftsman's Contract, these are experiments in static or restrained camera mobility that use this restraint or constraint to develop the storytelling. These works reveal an aesthetic, a thematic, an emotional possibility simply because of their cinematic restraint. In here, Zemeckis Zemeckis, why am I having difficulty with his name? Zemeckis. In here, Zemeckis confines the camera to a single spot, echoing Richard Maguire's graphic novel, and the film unfolds across centuries within the same frame. And the result is something like a stage play, where the space becomes the story's protagonist, and Zemeckis' meticulous pre-production ensured that every detail in the frame was laden with meaning. Walls, windows, shadows all contribute to the narrative, so I understand. And critics have decried the film as emotionally detached, questioning whether its technical daring came at the expense of its soul. But it's an interesting idea. If you look at the film in 2002, the Russian Ark, which was filmed in the Hermitage Museum, glides through 300 years of Russian history, all in the confines of one space without an edit. And the film employs this moving camera, creating an uninterrupted flow of time and space. And the continual take immerses the audience in the grandeur of the setting and the historical narrative. Unlike here, which remains stationary, Russian Ark demonstrates that motion without cuts can achieve fluidity without fragmentation. The same sort of thing Hitchcock tried to do in 1948 to create this illusion of a continuous take, though there are hidden cuts, cleverly disguised by camera zooms and fades to black. But the film's real-time narrative intensifies the tension increases, forcing the audience to confront the action without any pause. And the lack of visible edits creates this oppressive intimacy, amplifying the claustrophobia of the single-room setting. So the Zemeckis and Hitchcock are approaching the same issue, sort of limiting the movement to pull the audience into the story. What the American critics are saying, because they've seen the film, is that the Zemeckis thing it doesn't succeed in intensifying the action. It actually gets in the way of the action. In the Peter Greenaway stuff, in The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and His Lover, Greenaway's long tracking shots And the static frames emphasize the rigid hierarchy and the oppressive atmosphere of the location. And the draftsman's contract, again with this constraint about how the camera moves, mirrors classical paintings using static, symmetrical compositions to evoke the aesthetic and the social order of the 17th century. And Greenaway's films invite the audience to focus on the composition, on the colour, the set design, the symbolism, rather than the plot dynamics, which frankly defeat me. I went to see The Draftsman Contract again and again, and I still love watching it to try and work out if I can work out what's going on. And I can't. Each time I think I've got it, it defeats me, because I don't think it's a jigsaw which is not intended to be completed. And Restraint reinforces the themes of colour, power, and confinement and confusion. Derek Jarman's Blue, of course, is you're simply looking at a single unchanging blue screen and an evocative soundscape, forcing viewers to engage with narration and sound on a deeply personal level. Sokorov's Mother and Son in 1997, again, a minimal camera movement, reflects the quiet emotional intimacy of its characters, creating this painterly approach. Richard Williams' Prologue in 2015 is a single-shot animated short that showcases the beauty of uninterrupted storytelling. Again, I think he moves the camera more than I would want to, but I love the fluidity, the way he just goes from moment to moment and lets the lets the audience in on this narration. And he loves these very tight angles. So he goes from an extreme distance to something which is very, very close. That I don't think it would be possible to mimic in live action. Certainly not as agreeably or as successfully as he does with pencils and coloured pencils. And if you haven't seen Prologue, it's well worth checking out. Restraint resonates. So for me, when I'm designing characters, I think, well, let's take something out. Let's create characters without ears and see if anybody notices. Let's create characters that don't have necks or whatever. So by removing something, you add a new constraint. Or let's give the characters an extra digit, or take a digit away, which is what Mickey Mouse did, and it sort of you get beyond that. What's that? The eerie chasm, that gap where you think something is real and it's not quite real, and that's where I think modern 3D animation has fallen. You feel that something is sort of wrong because it's not quite real and it's not quite false. And I think there's something to be said for deliberately making something false. And the static frames and the long takes. I think can mirror the narrative, and what I've seen of here looks as if that's what it's doing. The unchanging camera reflects the cyclical nature of life. As in Rope, it mirrors the character's emotional entrapment. Here, the characters are trapped in a room that is built in front of us, and by removing the distraction of cuts and excessive movement, maybe filmmakers can amplify the tension, the intimacy, and the contemplation, because they remove some of the layers of grammar that we've got used to, and that we take for granted. And by shaking things up a little, maybe one can hope to tell a more dramatic story. Restraint in cinema is a double-edged sword. It can heighten focus and thematic resonance, but it risks alienating audience if the emotional core is lost in the technical bravado. Whether it's the static single spot of Here, the sweeping dance of Russian Ark, or Hitchcock's hidden edits in Rope, these films challenge us to rethink movement and stillness as tools of storytelling. And as cinema continues to evolve with artificial intelligence, CGI, digital filmmaking tools, filmmakers like Zemekis, after all, he was the person behind Roger Rabbit, Sakharov, and Greenaway remind us that sometimes less is truly more. Restraint, when wielded thoughtfully, can transform the screen into a canvas for profound, unforgettable storytelling. I'm looking forward to sitting in a cinema and seeing the Zemeckis film in all its glory when it's released, I think on the 17th of January here in the UK.